Lucas Paqueta can be a brilliant footballer, but he's not necessarily the kind of player, the kind of profile that you need in a team when you're potentially going into a relegation scrap. West Ham need fighters, we need grafters, and we need players who can set the tone, who will make the team hard to beat. Now, not many can say, with all honesty, that Lucas Paqueta is that kind of player. That was that was David Moyes' mantra when he took over for the second time at West Ham United back in the 2019-2020 season. When he took over from the flamboyant team that Manuel Pellegrini put together, had assembled, it didn't work for him, and he needed grafters. He needed to change that team in order to get us to be harder to beat. And this is the blueprint that Nuno Espirito Santo is looking like following if West Ham are going to avoid a relegation scrap this season. Now, if you're new to the West Ham boys, or if you've watched me before but still yet to become a subscriber, that QR code there enables you to become a subscriber straight away. And if you don't want to subscribe, no problem. Subscription's free, by the way. If you don't want to subscribe, then please do hit the like button to show your appreciation of the show. And at the very least, you can also click a hype button, which appears at the bottom of the video on YouTube, which allows you to promote the channel and promote the video to other viewers. And if you're feeling really generous, you can also become a member of the West Ham Boys. And all membership money raised goes towards prostate cancer UK. And an update on that, it's now 240 quid that's been raised for that charity. So let's get back to it. Some viewers have often asked me, why do I always make references back to David Moyes? Why do I have to keep referring to the past? Well, there are times when looking at what happened in the past could provide a smart insight as to what is about to happen or what needs to happen for the immediate future. By the way, that's the third cat. That's Ollie, the black cat. Got Sushi here out of camera as well. I'm blessed. 2 cats. The third one sleeping in the bedroom. But anyway, it's not a cat show. In this case, I can potentially see similarities between what Moyes did when he came back for his second spell at the club and what Nuno has already alluded to in his recent interviews and press conference. For example, Moyes didn't necessarily rip up the squad that he inherited overnight, but he did change the team's identity in order to become tougher to play against. He kept many of Pellegrini's starters at first, but slowly he replaced fancy, delicate options with combative, resilient players. If you recall, in his first transfer window, David Moyes went out and bought Thomas Souček and Jared Bowen. And they eventually, actually, Souček came in right from the start. He started regularly from almost the minute he arrived. But so they both became regular players, regular starters in the team that David Moyes put together. And it was swapping out players who weren't built for relegation fights. Now, these two players, Thomas Souček, demonstrated their worth at Slavia Prague and at Hull City, respectively. They were fighters. We could see that when they arrived. In essence, Moyes' team became more physical, more disciplined, and, as I said, set the tone for scrappy, necessary point gaining rather than aesthetic performances. If Nuno Espirito Santo really is the Portuguese version of David Moyes, I like what someone wrote in a comment the other day on one of my shows, Nuno, the Portugueser. I like that. Gives him a bit of East London edge. Anyway, if Nuno is to be the Portuguese version of David Moyes, then one thing I expect him to do when the January transfer window opens is to immediately go and bring in at least a couple of players who are going to be those kind of battlers, those kind of grafters, players who know that when things are not easy, they knuckle down and set the tone that the rest of the team will follow. Nuno has talked about getting to know his players, and there's a good reason for that. Well, many good reasons for that. And one of them obviously being that those players he currently has available to him have got between now and the January transfer window to demonstrate that they have what it takes to get West Ham rising up the table. Nuno is looking for grit over glamour. And if the grit isn't there, then he'll seek to bring it in during the transfer window itself. And it's regardless of position in the squad. He may decide he needs more defenders, other midfielders, or another player up front to provide that steely determination. But just like what Moyes did, where possible, he's going to keep the continuity going, and where needed, until the January window opens, he will change core parts of the current team to get them harder to beat. Now, we all have our views on the areas that we believe need strengthening. Some fans would advocate bringing in yet another combative midfielder who can screen the back four and win those second balls. Now, if possible, if at all possible, I would look to get Edson Alvarez back into the West Ham fold from his current loan spell at Fenerbahce. With Jose Mourinho gone, who was the instigator to get Alvarez to the Turkish team, there might just be a small chance that this could now happen. Other fans would advocate that we need stronger defenders in the mould of the likes of Craig Dawson and Angelo Ogbonna, the type of centre-backs who've got leadership and aggression. The current centre-backs just don't seem to have that edge about them, do they? And of course, other fans would argue that we need an aggressive, mobile target man who knows where the back of the net is. And some have gone as far to suggest that we should get Antonio back. But we all know that his time in top flight football is really done and dusted. And to be honest, we really desperately need a younger striker. Let's think of the squad overall in a bit more depth. First off, in goal, Nuno, despite making the vague suggestion that Hermansen might get another chance under Nuno, he's been decisive to ensure that it's Alphonse Areola who stays our number one player in goal at this moment in time. Moyes did much the same when he ensured that it was going to be Darren Randolph who was going to be a backup to Fabianski rather than Roberto. Do you remember him? That was Pellegrini's downfall, wasn't it? And in a way, some may argue that Hermansen was the catalyst in a way for this season to be Potter's downfall. Anyway, centre-back wise, I've already mentioned Dinos is growing under Nuno's guidance and could become an integral part of his defence, much like the unfancied Issa Diop was under David Moyes. But Dinos didn't really have a good international break, so I think he's still got an awful lot to prove. But maybe the same can be said of Max Kilman, who must start showing some fight that the likes of Ogbonna had back in the 2019 and 2020 season as well. I wouldn't be surprised if a defensive recruitment happens in January. In midfield, I've already mentioned the possibility of Edson Alvarez returning to West Ham. It will not surprise me if Nuno really does try to get him, because I think he's actually a perfect fit under this current manager. Many would argue that Alvarez is a liability, and he's picked up enough yellow cards and red cards to demonstrate that to be the case. But under Nuno's guidance, he could become a vital cog in building a West Ham team who need that grit and determination in midfield. Now, I like Songutu Magassa. He's a player that looks like he's got some fight in him. And a pivot of Alvarez and Magassa might strengthen or should strengthen a poor midfield. Probably in the same way, again, when I look back to that 2019-2020 season, in the same way that Moyes galvanised both Rice and Noble in that central midfield. At the moment, Nuno is using Fernandes in that deeper midfield role. But does it really suit him? I'm not so sure. But if Nuno did play with a pivot two, with then two wide players, with the likes of Bowen and Somerville, that would then leave Potts, Freddie Potts, James Ward-Prowse, Thomas Soucek, Fernandes himself, and Lucas Paqueta to fight for that one remaining spot in central midfield. That's 5 players. Now, again, back in 2019, 2020, Moyes used a variety of players in that particular midfield area. He utilised wide players like Bowen, Yarmolenko, Anderson, Snodgrass, and Antonio at times in the wide roles. But that central midfield role was shared between the likes of Lanzini, Fornals, and then when Soucek arrived, he almost made it his own. Now, we know there are certain players that kind of are completely out the frame. For example, James Ward-Prowse is most definitely out of the picture. And I think the likes of Freddie Potts is more likely to be used from the subs bench rather than as a starter, which means that this central attacking midfield role could be a choice in terms of regular starters between Soucek, Fernandes, and Paqueta. Right now, the player that I would least likely pick is Lucas Paqueta. Now, we know what he has. We know his strengths, exceptional technical ability, but not naturally a midfield enforcer or a consistent marker during a relegation dogfight. What we know Paqueta possesses is he's got great flair, great vision, great creativity, and he does have that ability to unlock defenses. I think he made a beautiful goal for Brazil, didn't he, in midweek? But on the flip side, he doesn't track runners consistently. And when he does, he rarely wins the ball back. Sometimes when he gets the ball too deep in midfield, he loses it. He struggles in physical duels, and he can drift out of games when the team is under siege. Moyes had a similar issue again with certain players. The likes of Anderson springs to mind. Dazzling on his day, but not trusted when survival was at stake. So what do we do with Lucas Paqueta? Well, the controversial question really is, do you start Lucas Paqueta or do you bench Lucas Paqueta? You know, it's a time when every player really needs to turn up. And with the greatest of respect to him, can we afford to carry someone that is a little bit fancy, but not necessarily relishing a relegation dogfight? The alternative, if you start him, then maybe you give him a much freer role up front. With the potential long-term injury of Nicholas Fulkrug and the uncertainty of whether Callum Wilson can last a whole game and whether Callum Marshall is still not quite ready to lead the line, then Nuno's got a decision to make. Nuno can play Paqueta in a further upfront role, in a kind of a false makeshift number 9 role. Now, he's played in that role before with varying degrees of success. But maybe this is what Nuno goes for until he can find an answer in the January transfer window. I'll go back to 2019, 2020 again. Moyes did have options up front, but he preferred a makeshift Antonio to lead the line over Sebastian Haller. And perhaps Nuno is going to have to do the same thing with Paqueta being used as a false number 9. Alternatively, dare I say it, use Paqueta as an impact sub when the game opens up. I wonder how many of you agree with that. It'd be interesting to see your comments on it. Having said all this, if Alvarez does return, if we do get an enforcer like Alvarez to come back to central midfield, then alongside Magassa, then Nuno could block box clever and allow Lucas that free role just in front in that attacking midfield role. And he can create the chances for the likes of Bowen, Somerville, and a striker to latch onto. However, Paqueta hasn't created any goals or any goal scoring opportunities, nor any assists so far this season. His last assist was in the 1-1 draw against Crystal Palace last season. And the last goal scoring opportunity he created was in the penultimate game of the season when we lost 2-1 to Chelsea. But look, the clock is ticking on the Brazilian. And with the return of Thomas Soucek after suspension, and maybe the possibility of Alvarez returning, the battle for midfield, those midfield roles, will get even tougher. And when you're in a relegation battle, then you want to see how hungry all the players really are.